Welcome back, everyone. For today's video, we're going to be taking a look at the St. Louis Rapid and Blitz, which is part of the Grand Chess Tour. Now, not off to a great start so far. I've won one game, I've lost two with a couple of draws, but we start the day with a pretty smooth and simple draw with the white pieces against Wesley. And the first game we're going to be taking a look at is the game that I played against Leinier Dominguez with the black pieces in the 8th round of the Rapid portion. So the game starts with the move e4, and here I decide to play the move e6, once again deciding to play the French defense. Now, this is not an opening that I've played a lot in recent years. In fact, I haven't really studied it, at least not from the black side, in about 10 years. But life goes on, chess always changes, there are new ideas, and you might as well take a chance and experiment. So we get d4, I go d5, knight c3, and now I play the move knight f6. Here the game continues with the move e5, I play knight fd7, we get f4, c5, knight f3, knight c6, and now Dominguez plays the move bishop e3. Now all this is pretty standard, but I decide to go back to my roots and play this line with takes, and queen b6. This is a line that I first studied all the way back in the year 2011, nearly 13 years ago, when I played in the Monaco tournament. It was in the Amber event in Monte Carlo, and I actually came up with this idea when I was working with the famous world chess champion Garry Kasparov. So the game continues with queen d2, takes, rook b1, queen a3, and now white plays bishop b5. I trade the knights, and I play the move a6. Now, all this is pretty standard, nothing super crazy. But to give you guys an idea of how much theory progresses, I had this position in 2011 against Wesley Topalov with the black pieces. Now in that game, Wesley played rook b3, I played queen e7, bishop a4, and after b5, takes, knight b5, queen d8, and queen c3. We played a very, very sharp game. I believe that I did lose that game if I'm not mistaken, but it's not all that clear cut. At any rate, with modern theory, Dominguez instead decides to take on d7. He goes rook b3, kicks the queen back, and now he takes the pawn on b7. Now, if white were to play rook b3 and queen e7 first, after takes, you take with the queen and you guard the pawn on b7, which is why white decides to trade first. We get the move rook b7, rook to c8, castles, and now I play the move queen d8. This is pretty much the starting position for the whole line, and actually Dominguez himself has had some games in this variation which I was aware of. So when Dominguez goes to f5, I take the pawn, and he plays this move king to h1. Now last year, Dominguez in fact had this exact position against Arjun Erigaisi, one of the most talented Indian junior players in the world, and he probably was hoping that he would treat this as a memory test, and maybe I wouldn't remember the exact precise line. Unfortunately for Leinier, I had actually looked at this before the game, and I knew exactly what to do. So I go bishop c5, we get the trade, he plays knight d5, and now I go bishop e6, trying to win the knight on d5 or the queen on d2. In this position, the game continues with rook e7, I go king f8, queen b4, I take with the bishop, and now he takes my rook on c5. Again, this has all been played, so I think Dominguez was hoping that I would not remember this, but as I said, I looked at it in the morning, so I'm obviously not going to be forgetting the line. So I take, we get check, queen e8, queen c7, and now I play this move g6, creating an escape hatch for the king on g7. Dominguez plays queen d6, and now I go king g8. Now, one of the great things is that at this point, I wasn't 100% sure of what the best moves were, but there really aren't many options. If I go king g7, there's queen f6 check. If I go king h6, rook to f4, let's just say check, and king g3, suddenly my king is getting mated on the edge of the board, and I'm simply going to lose this game. Additionally, if I play this move queen e7, which the computer says is okay, this is borderline impossible because after rook b1, takes, king g7, and c4, suddenly white is pushing p up the board in the middle, and I'm in a lot of trouble here. So I play king g8 because it looks like the only move. We get rook b1, and now I play this move queen to a8 check. Now I believe in the game between Dominguez and Arjun played this move queen to a4. Now while this is still actually a draw here, Arjun somehow did go on to lose the game. So I go queen a8, we get king g3, I play queen to e4, very important move here, trying to go after the white king, because after rook to b8 and king g7, queen f6, and king h6, now I cover the 4th rank, there are no rook lifts to try and checkmate me, and after rook takes rook, the game ends in a draw by repetition here. I simply just keep checking the king all the way up the board, it doesn't really matter, and if white ever goes to h4, then you get a checkmate on the g4 square. So a pretty smooth game, pretty smooth draw in the second game of the day, and now we move to the 9th and final round of the Rapid event. Obviously, it's not the result that I'm hoping for, but luckily nobody is running away with the event. And fortunately for me, I'm playing against Rameshbabu, Praggnanandhaa from India, a very talented player, but someone who has been struggling in this event. He was in last place going to this game, and in the 8th round of the rapid portion, he drew a very tough game against Alireza, a game where he probably was close to winning. He was at the very least better for much of it, and so he was in a very unhappy state of mind going into this game. So, in this game, I play the move knight f3, much like I did against Wesley in the first game of the day, where I go knight f3 and g3. You might also recognize that I'm playing the openings that Levi Roseman has been playing in Italy. He's also been playing a lot of knight f3, g3, and also knight f3, e3. So we get g3, Pragg plays g6, and here I go b3, bishop g7, bishop b2, and Pragg decides to play the classic copycat game where he is mirroring my setup. So I go c4, bishop b7, bishop g2, and now he decides to play the move c5. This is a typical mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all. All of our moves have been identical. So here I play the move e3, Pragg castles, I castle, and now he decides to play d5, breaking the harmony. Black could obviously play e6 here, and the game is pretty balanced, but instead he decides to play d5. Now, one thing that's very important to note is because I've played Pragg a lot in recent times, I can generally sense his style, and he is a player who's very optimistic, and he's always trying to create chances. He does not like boring, stable draws. He wants to play for the initiative. So I play the move queen e2. Pragg goes knight to c6, and now I go knight to e5, trying to use the classic double wooden shield here, opening up the diagonals for the b's and creating chaos in the center of the board. Pragg plays queen c7, and now I go f4, reinforcing my knight on the e5 square. Pragg plays the move rook a d8, and now I go d3, and I actually have created a very symmetrical and harmonious pawn structure. You'll notice that I have the pawns all connected. They're actually identical on both sides of the board. I have the 2 here, and then I also have the classic connect 3 on the edges, and so my pawns are mirroring each other. Now here Pragg plays move a6, and this is where I could sense that Pragg was trying very hard to not create something stable. I think in this position, if black takes on c4 here, I probably have to take with the d-pawn, which is not what I want to do. And after, say, knight e5, bishop e5, and queen c8 here, due to the symmetrical pawn structure in this position, I don't think black should ever be in any trouble whatsoever. He should be able to draw the game without too much difficulty. Instead, Pragg plays a6. Now I go knight to d2, bringing my knight into the game. I really don't want to put the knight on c3 because I might hang something in the center of the board, and it also closes the scope for the bishop. If I go knight a3, the knight's on the rim, and it doesn't really do much here. b5 is a square that's covered, so I go to d2 with the idea of keeping the scope open and reinforcing my knight on e5 by moving this knight to f3. So here Pragg plays the move d takes c4, and now I play the move b takes c4. Now at this point I was very happy because I have to go d c4. Once again, we are in a situation where the pawns are symmetrical, and it's going to be very hard to do anything special. So I take with the b pawn. Pragg plays knight d7, and now we get massive trades here in this position, and I go knight to f3. Now at this point, white is apparently a little bit worse, but I felt very optimistic because I have an open b file to pressure the pawn on b6. I also have a queen b2 idea to put pressure on the king, and if black moves the knight away, he always potentially yields this e5 square for my horse. So Pragg plays knight b8, I go rook fd1, not knight e5 by the way, because then f6 would kick the horse out of town. Black wins the juicer and wins the game as well. So I go rook fd1 to guard the pawn on d3, and Pragg plays the move rook to d6. After rook d6, I go rook a b1, trying to pressure the pawn on b6, and Pragg goes king g8. Here I play the move rook to b3, trying to overprotect the pawn on d3, but also maybe hoping that down the road I can create the classic legendary triple stack here, or what is known as Alyoshin's gun, with the 2 rooks and the queen pressuring the pawn on b6. So Pragg plays knight c6 here, and now I go a3, trying to take away the square from the horse where it would be able to pressure the pawn on d3. Pragg goes rook b8, and now I go queen c2, we get rook d8, and now I play the move queen c3. Now at this point, both players have achieved pretty much the optimal setup. Pragg has his double stack pressuring the pawn on d3. I'm guarding the pawn on d3, but I'm also trying to pressure the pawn on b6, and both of our knights are pretty harmonious too because neither side has any squares. My pawn on e3 and a3 stop the knight from jumping here, and also his knight stops my knight from going to the e5 square. So Pragg plays knight a5 here, I go rook to b2, we get queen c6, and now I make a fairly serious mistake when I play this move knight to e5. Now, while I was thinking about this position, I mentioned this during my interview with the official broadcast, I was thinking to myself, what are we playing for? In this position from the white side, what are my ideas and what are Pragg's ideas from the black side? Now, the first important point is that if black can ever get something like b5 here, I guess it's white's move, or it's black's move. Let's say black was b5 here. If black can ever get this pressure on the d file, black is doing very well. If I take and I allow something like c4, in the right moment, this is probably okay for black. Here it isn't, but the point is that b5 is the break that black is looking for. All right, so I'm restricting the pawn break. Black doesn't have this option. So that's really the only play that black has. You can't really play in the center of the board here because trying to get an e5 to attack here would simply hang a pawn in the center of the board. So it's very hard for black to play on e5, which means b5 is the only idea that really exists. And then I start thinking, well, what are my ideas from the white side? Here in this position, let's just say, okay, let's say black plays h6. If I try to go d4 after takes, I simply lose the pawn on c4. So I can't really play for d4. Now I can maybe go e4, but after knight c6, there's this very juicy square for the horse on d4, and this pawn on d3 is now a permanent weakness. All right, so in this position, I can't really play for d4 or e4. Black can't really play for b5 here, so what else can I do? So then I start thinking, what are the weaknesses? So a big weakness in my position is this pawn on d3, which black is spying with the two towers. So in a perfect world, how do I try to get rid of this weakness or defend it? And this is where I concluded that after queen c6, what I really need to do is I need this knight on a better square, because what I want to do is I'd love to be able to play a move like rook to b1. I'm just going to set it up. Something like this position here, where I can pressure the pawn on b6, but I can't ever really do that because the pawn on d3 will be hanging. Now, I could try to put a knight on e1 and guard like this, but then the knight is very passive and it doesn't have any squares to move to. It's just always guarding the pawn. So then I conclude, well, you know where I want my knight after queen 6? I want the knight on f2. So basically what I would love to get is this sort of position where the knight's on f2, guarding the pawn, and then I can play rook to b1, stacking and pressuring the pawn on b6, and maybe down the road I can even try to jump with the knight to e4 and hit the rook on d6, potentially. Now, it's still very flat and equal, but if I get the knight on f2, it will free up my towers so I can stack them on the b file. All right, so I play knight e5, and the move that I was expecting was queen a4, rook to d2, and then I figured after f6, I get the knight to f2, and I'm doing completely fine. So I play knight e5 after a 3-minute think, and much to my horror, I immediately realized that black can actually move the queen to c8, which stops me from moving my knight to g4, and suddenly if I'm not getting the knight to g4 to f2, then there are all kinds of problems here in the middle of the board. I probably have to play something like rook b d2, f6, knight f3, but now after queen d7, black has achieved the legendary triple stack. My knight is very passive, I have no square, and black might even be able to play for the b5 pawn break in the near future. Fortunately for me, Pragg, I think a little bit tilted, not completely filling the position. He goes queen to a8 instead, and now I get to play the move knight to g4 here, and I'm going to get my knight to f2 to guard the pawn. Now keep in mind, black has to be a little bit careful, because if you play a move like queen to f3, attacking the rook and the knight here, I simply have knight to h6 check, king f8, and then queen h8 is checkmate, and it's uh-oh spaghetti-o time. So Pragg plays f6, cutting off the threats on the diagonal. I go knight to f2, guarding the pawn, and now he plays the move queen f3. Here I go queen c1, guarding the rook and the pawn at the same time. Pragg plays queen c6, I go queen c2, queen f3, and now I decide to play the move rook e1. Here he goes king g7, and now I go queen to e2. I really need to play this move because, once again, I'd love to move my rook to b1, but now I hang the pawn on e3. So it's sort of a situation where the knight has now guarded the pawn on d3, this weakness, but now the queen is always hitting this pawn, and there's simply too many weaknesses in the position, so I decide to play the move queen e2, trading into the endgame. Now I'm still doing quite well here because black has the permanent weakness and my knight still guards the pawn on d3, but black is very close to equalizing. Pragg plays e5, and now I go rook c2. This is a move that I did not want to play. I knew that taking had to be the right choice, but after rook c2 and e4 here, suddenly I'm really struggling. If I take with the knight, black takes on d3. I guess I can take on b6 here, but after rook e3, knight c5, and something like rook c8, the game is going to peter out into a draw in short order. Additionally, if I take what looks like the free pawn with d takes e4 here, black can simply play a move like rook to e8, and I always have this rook which is stuck guarding the pawn. The knight is always stuck guarding this pawn, and I can't really do a whole lot. In fact, I don't even think that white can be better here. If anybody is better, I think it's probably black. So I decide to go rook c2, and now Pragg takes on f4. And this is another decision where I think Pragg's youth and optimism and sort of lack of objectivity, because he's doing poorly in the event, really play a huge role. If black were to play this move rook to e8, after takes, rook takes e5, rook e2, and f5, let's just say king g2, rook e8, king f3, and black goes knight c6, I can never be better here. Basically, I always have these weaknesses on the E file, the D file, and also the weakness on the C4 square, so I cannot be better here. It's just not possible because of where my pawns are placed. Pragg instead takes, and now once again, I'm able to capture towards the center, and I have this very weird formation. I think this is called the bathtub formation, if I'm not mistaken, with the 4 pawns all together like this. But at any rate, there is a lot of flexibility in my position with these pawns. Pragg goes rook e6, I go rook e2, rook e8, and now I'm able to play the move king g2, bringing the king to f3 to guard the pawn on e3. Now you will notice that Pragg here has outside pawns. He has 3 connected on the queen side and the king side here, but black is really struggling primarily because the knight on a5 is stuck. So we get king f7, I go king to f3. Worth pointing out, by the way, if black trades the rooks on e3, after rook b6, this knight is out to lunch. Black is still probably okay after f5, because now my knight has no jumps, and when I take, now the knight gets to the d4 square. You get a bastion here, and black is probably okay, but it's still hard to go for this. So Pragg plays king f7, I go king f3, and now he is able to bring the horse back into the game here, because if I play rook takes pawn, black is a nice fossil with knight to e5 checking the king. I take, he takes my rook, and now I lose the game. So I go knight to e4 here. Pragg plays knight e7. Another excellent move. Pragg is understanding where his knight belongs. The optimal square for the black horse is going to be f5 because it always spies the pawn on e3 here. And now black can try to move the rooks over to the d file to pressure the pawn on d3. So I go knight g3 to stop knight to f5, and now Pragg plays knight c6. We repeat, and I decide to go for more with this move a4. Now, this is a very important move again, because if I play rook to b3, knight to f5, and rook b2 here, now black can play the move b5, and if I take, there's suddenly the c4 pawn break, and with the towers on the e file, this weak horse, I am in real trouble after rook b4 and a takes b5. So I take, he takes, and suddenly everything is collapsing on the e file. So I play the move a4 here, and one of the ideas if black plays, let's just say a move like knight g8, now I can play a5, wrecking the pawn structure of black, and after takes and knight c5, I have 4 connected pawns in the center of the board after rook c6 and d4, and now I'm pushing my p in the center, and I should win the game. So Pragg plays a5, which stops me from pushing, but now black will never have the b5 pawn break to undermine my central pawns here. So I go rook b3, he plays h6, and now I play this move rook b2, which is simply a mistake. What I should have played here, or actually, wait, wrong position, sorry. What I should have played, I have the wrong order, is after rook b2 and f5 here, I should have played this move knight to c3 here, and after knight c6, I have, actually, wait, no, I'm wrong. Sorry, you guys. I'm doing this recap live, so I'm a little bit confused. Let me figure out what I did wrong. Oh, it was right here. Sorry, this position. What I should have played here was the move knight to c3. And the reason this move is so good is that after rook d8 and rook d2 here, I have this big threat of jumping to the center with the horse. And I actually thought black would play knight f5. And after knight d5, you could sack the rook, take on e3, and go rook h3 with massive compensation. But after king g1, knight d4, and rook d1, knight f3, and king h1, white is simply close to winning here because you have a rook for a horse. You can bring the rook over, move the king up, and black should be lost. So I played rook b3 instead, and this, as I was starting to say, was actually a mistake here because in this position after rook b2, after knight c3 and knight to c6 here, I thought that I initially could play, and I got it wrong again. Sorry, you guys, 1 second. So I played rook b3 here. He plays h6. I go rook b2. Yeah. So right here, actually, what I thought, what I initially thought was that give me a second to catch my breath before I lose my mind. Was that, how did this occur? I play rook b3, h6, yeah, right here. I thought I could actually play the move knight c3, and I was much better, which is why I thought h6 was not a possible move, because after knight f5, I thought I had knight d5, and I go after the pawn, I've got a bash, and I win the game. But black can sack the rook, with rook takes pawn, takes, sack again, and after knight to d4 check, king e4, and knight b3, black is completely fine. So I was very unhappy when I saw h6 because now black actually has the idea to play f5 and kick the horse. Say I go rook c2 and f5. I no longer have the knight g5 idea to fork the king and the rook, and I'm actually potentially in some trouble. Additionally, black can also try to play g5 here, and after takes, now he can use the open h file for the rook, and things can get very, very sketchy in a hurry. So I play the move rook b2, we get f5, knight c3, knight c6 here. Now I go knight to d5, guarding the pawn, and Pragg plays knight b4. Now Pragg here creating the classic bastion for the horse on b4, but he also has the diamond hands formation with these pawns on b6, a5, c5 combined with the horse. Here I go rook to e2, trying to guard the pawn in case black trades the knights off the board here. and Pragg plays this move g5. Now, this is a huge mistake at the end of a long game for Pragg. He simply falls apart. Now, if Pragg had played the move rook to d8 here, I would have had to go rook b2, and after takes, rook b6, rook d3, takes, rook b5, king d5, rook a5, rook a3, and rook a8. I should be able to make the draw here with the even material in the rook and pawn endgame, but I have zero chances of winning. Alas, Pragg plays this move g5 after a 20-second think, and he simply overlooks this move knight to c7, forking the two rooks, and suddenly everything is gone. Black is simply just losing the position. Pragg plays move g4, I go king to f2, he plays rook d6, and now I take the rook, and here he decides to play the move rook takes d3. Now, if black were to take with the knight checking the king, I go king f1, king e8, and after rook to d2, black is going to lose either the horse or the rook on d6. Either way, this is GG, why not? So, Pragg plays rook d3, and now I decide to play the move rook takes rook. Now, there probably are multiple ways to win. The other move I considered briefly was sacking the rook with rook takes knight, and after takes, knight c7, I'm probably still winning with the horse, but after rook c3, knight d5, takes, and rook c1, black is trying to push the p here. He's got the c and b pawns rolling up the board, and there's literally no good reason to go into this endgame when I can simply trade the towers, play king g3, and after king e8, I can open up the e file. Once I get an open file for the rook here, it's simply GG on the spot. So I go e4 here, and now in this position, Pragg takes. I take on g4. I could take e4 too, but there's no need because I simply want to bring my king around and win the pawn. Pragg plays king f7. I go king f5. He goes e3, and now I decide to take the pawn with the rook. He goes knight b2 here, trying to fork the two pawns on c4 and a4, but here I play the move rook c3, and after knight takes a4 and rook to b3, Pragg resigns the game here because his knight is completely stuck. It has no squares available, and basically the way the game should conclude is I start moving my king. Eventually, I just push the pawn up the board. We got some position like this. I go here, f7, king f6 here, and eventually black has to yield. You can, I guess, sack the knight or play b5, but after rook e3, followed by rook to e8, it simply will be checkmate. So, after rook b3, I get a very important win in the final round of the rapid portion. I'm currently 2 points out of first place, which is a small miracle considering how poorly I felt I played throughout the rapid portion, but nonetheless, it's a great way to finish off the third day. So, I'm 2 points out of first place. There are going to be 18 rounds of Blitz played over the next 2 days. If I play well, good things should happen, but there's still many, many rounds to go. So, on that note, I hope you guys have enjoyed this recap from day number 3 of the St. Louis Rapid and Blitz, which is part of the Grand Chess Tour. I will be back tomorrow with another recap after the Blitz portion. I don't know how many games I'll recap or what I'll do, but I hope you guys have enjoyed it. So I'll see you guys very soon, and have a great rest of your day. Have a good one. Bye.